Hello, my name is Chris Carrigy. I am President of Advanced Business Systems. Together with my father, Henry Carrigy, we formed ABS in 1999 to represent the award-winning Navision ERP solution. Since that time, we have added locations and personnel throughout the southeastern and south central United States. From these locations, we support a diverse customer base from coast to coast and in several foreign countries. The team members at ABS average over 12 years of experience on Dynamics NAV. This team of consultants, trainers, and developers have the Dynamics NAV product completely covered from a functionality standpoint. Some things that we do different than our competition at ABS are: 1, we continue to develop ways to implement NAV more quickly and more accurately. 2, we embrace the newer emerging technologies that support and complement NAV, and we become experts in these technologies. As an example, ABS was one of the first solution centers to put a large NAV install up on the Microsoft Cloud. 3, we have the most comprehensive support plans in the industry. They not only target NAV, but the infrastructure surrounding NAV that allows NAV to operate properly. At ABS, we like teaching our clients how to use ERP to become more efficient and profitable. Please give us a call to see if partnering with ABS makes sense for your organization. Thank you very much.
For today, we're going to talk a little bit about, as you see, the traits of a successful business, some of the challenges, and we'll talk specifically about the challenges of what we call manual tax compliance, which will clarify what that means. We'll talk a little bit about how technology can help and what the Avalara solution represents. And then as we go through this, feel free to enter questions into the chat box or at the end as we conclude and go to the Q&A time, please feel free to just voice your question and talk to us about what you need to know. So let's go ahead to the next slide, Philip. As you see on this slide, it says the recession is over. I don't know if everybody feels that way or not, but certainly the struggles of our crazy recession from 2008, 2009 onward seem to be a thing of the past. And if you look at the latest economic report from the White House, things are back almost at all-time highs in a lot of our key indicators. So business has never been better, right? But also what that means is there is a lot of opportunity, and it also means that being more strategic in the systems you use and how you use them so that you have the resources to capitalize on this opportunity is even more important. So today we're going to talk about how you can maximize your investment in NAV, in Microsoft Dynamics as your ERP platform, or whatever else your tool might be, and talk about kind of step-by-step plans so that you can operate smarter, grow faster, and really take advantage of the growth that's happening overall in the economy today. So let's go ahead and move forward, Kalei, to some of the traits that we see of really successful businesses. And we service literally thousands of customers and are involved in millions and millions of sales tax transactions that we see as a company. So we've actually seen a lot of things. And what we know is that companies have invested in a system like NAV to do some things. One is to scale operations. Another is to automate specific processes and to really achieve greater visibility into your core business functions, all to help you have a stronger bottom line and to run your entire business more efficiently. So the goal is to adopt the type of business solution that's going to be there with you as you make business decisions and as you grow and take advantage of this growth mode that the economy is in. So it's important that you leverage it in a way that will make these future business decisions easier. So for instance, what if you actually expanded beyond the borders of the U.S. and what if you expanded into another state or worked with a new distributor or you launched an online store or you launched a second online store? All of these activities have complicated tax challenges that go with them. And the question is are you prepared to handle those challenges? So on the next slide here, some real truths about sales tax, right, is we know that sales tax, it's one of these have-tos, right? It's a statutory requirement. It is not core to your business. It doesn't generate revenue. It doesn't help you succeed. It doesn't help you grow your top line or your bottom line. We know it's time-consuming. There's a lot of moving parts to it. It's very error-prone, and it actually creates risk in your business. So there's some things that make sales tax really complicated. So let's talk a little bit more about some of these challenges specifically and dig into some of these problems here. So Clay, you can go to the next slide. So the slide you're looking at there talks about zip codes, the wrong tool for the job. Well, what do we mean by that? So when Dynamics NAV and other ERP systems were built years ago, right? Even systems that were built in the 80s and as they have been revised, a lot of them used a zip code or even a zip code +4 as a definition of a tax jurisdiction, right? And so the challenge is that that's not good enough. Many counties, cities, states, special tax jurisdictions have no alignment to zip codes. So tax zip code, your tax rate can vary quite a bit, even within a zip code. And we can show you examples of where that happens all over the country. And so you don't want to just rely on zip codes. Unfortunately, that's what a lot of native functionality in ERP systems uses. It's just a definition of a zip code. So let's look at this next slide here when we talk about this, just to kind of illustrate the point. And so here you see a map of a couple of counties right around the Denver area. So this will show you 5 counties in the Denver area. And then if you click the next place, we're going to zoom into this a little bit, specifically where a couple of these meet, and now look at the zip code level, right? So here we're looking at the zip codes in and around Centennial, Colorado, Inglewood, Greenwood Village. So you see each of the zip codes there, and these define specific areas, right? So if we actually look at the overlay of how sales tax jurisdictions wrap around these, you can see that each of the different colors is a different sales tax rate in and amongst these different zip codes, in and amongst these different counties. And you can see that the jurisdiction lines don't necessarily follow the zip code lines at all. And so if you rely on zip code, it won't give you the right answer, right? So you can see, look at all of these different taxes just in the 80111 zip code, right? There's all these different taxes depending on technically which city, which county line that you're a part of. So keeping track of these things and using just a normal zip code is inaccurate to get you to the exact zip code that you need. So let's go to the next one where it talks about rates, rules, and boundary changes. So, there are actually over 12,000 different taxing districts. There are millions and millions of addresses all over the U.S., right? There are hundreds of thousands of different product taxability rules that says, hey, what is the tax on a certain item in a certain state or a certain taxing jurisdiction? There's tax holidays, there's exemptions that can happen for a whole variety of different reasons. And then there are these things called sourcing and nexus rules that we'll kind of go into. So the way I like to think about this is you probably remember when you were in elementary school or junior high and in math class, you had to figure out the odds of winning the lottery were, right? And it was based on how many tickets were sold. Well, this is a combination problem that actually goes way beyond that, right? It goes into the fact that not only do you have jurisdictions and addresses and product taxability, but it's like a problem to the nth degree. You have so many moving parts in this that it's difficult to keep track of everything. So let's go to the next slide and talk a little bit about taxability, right? So here's the challenge is that something that's taxable in your state might be taxed differently in another state. And the rules are different, and everybody gets to make them themselves, right? States are in complete control. There's no federal guidelines around sales tax rules. every state, every district can actually make them differently. So this is some of the things that happen. So here on the next slide, we'll talk about an example of this, right? So if you look in this next slide, you can see that there's two candy bars here, right? One is a Milky Way and one is a Milky Way Dark. So the Milky Way Originals are non-taxable because they contain flour, right? And Milky Way Midnight are taxable because they don't contain flour. So is that true in all states? Well, no, except in Washington, where candy and gum are exempt from retail sales tax completely. So the rules, so you have a product even from the same company with the same name that based in the food world, based on ingredients, will be taxed different ways in different places. So these taxability rules are always changing. And what we're starting to see a lot of is changing rules, especially around services. And so if you're involved in a services business or you have services as a component of your offering, sales tax rules are changing dramatically across the country. And as states try to claim more and more of the lost revenue as they perceive it, they're changing rules around services and other kinds of products. So you have to keep track of these, because if you are selling your product into a state that has different product taxability rules and you aren't enforcing those, it's on you. And if you ever get audited, you're liable for back taxes, penalties, and fines if you're not in compliance with what the rules of the state are. So let's go ahead to the next slide, relate to sourcing rules. So we talked a little bit, the sourcing rules are really a component in the calculation of tax, right? And it talks about, hey, where is the goods or services coming from? And so as you see on the slide, we have three different flavors of this. So the majority of states are what we call destination-based states. That's all the way over on the right. Destination-based states, it's pretty straightforward. Wherever you're shipping your product or delivering your goods or services, that's the rules of the land in terms of what taxation happens. All the way on the left-hand side, you can see there's a handful of states that are what's called origin-based states for products, right? And so for origin-based states of products, the tax is determined based on where it's coming from, right? The seller's business location is what determines the tax. And then we have, unfortunately, two of the most populous states in the country that are, well, the answer is it depends, right? So if you're in California or Texas, the sourcing rules actually are mixed, right? So you can see in California, counties are origin-based, cities and special tax jurisdictions are destination-based, right? In Texas, cities and counties are origin-based, and same thing are destination-based. So services can be always or sometimes. So we have a lot of complexity in that if you do business in these states, you have to be aware of what all these rules are and how they apply specifically to your products. So one of the keys is sourcing only takes place if you have nexus within a given jurisdiction. So what is this word nexus? So if we go to the next slide, Clay. So nexus is defined, the traditional definition of nexus was, do you have physical presence, right? And so physical presence defines nexus, but now in this age of internet sales and everything else, what defines nexus has been a moving target, and it varies state by state. So for instance, if you have salespeople that travel to other states and maybe don't live in the same state as where your office is, but live in a different state, are remote and travel, that can constitute nexus. If you have a labor contract, so they're not employees, but you have contract workers in a different state, that can constitute nexus. Do you actually do trade shows in specific states? Some states, if you do a certain number of days of trade shows or exhibits in a state, that defines nexus. So nexus is this vastly changing landscape, and it varies widely state to state. On this slide, you see the statistic that says 1 in 3 accounting professionals don't know all the states where their business has nexus. That's accounting people, right, and whose job it is to manage tax and income tax and all these things. And this is from a study by Wakefield Research. So nexus is complex, and it's one of these varied ingredients that go into the process. Another challenge to all of this, on the next slide, Clay, is the exempt products that if you're involved in a business where you're a manufacturer or distributor, you sell to distribution, sales tax in the U.S. is usually levied against the person that's going to use the item, So the classic example is to think about cars, right? So a car gets sold to an individual. When you buy a car, you pay sales tax on that car, right? But guess what? The building of that car, if you're involved in the supply chain of building a car, and there's multiple tiers to it, what if I'm a component maker and I make the spring coils for a shock absorber, right? I make the spring coil, I sell it to the shock absorber company. The shock absorber company sells to an aggregator that sells to a car manufacturer. All of those transactions along the line are actually tax exempt. Now, what does that mean? Well, so to prove that your transaction is exempt, you actually have to have a piece of paper called an exemption certificate. You actually have to apply to your state or taxing jurisdiction to get an exemption certificate. There are different rules. Different states have different rules around when they expire and how long they can last and what they cover in terms of one or multiple locations. So being tax exempt is really critical, and there's a bunch of rules that go around what you can be exempt for. And so this is another element that you have to manage, that if you're providing goods or services, you have to identify which customers of mine might be exempt, and do I have a piece of paper that proves that? Because if I don't have that piece of paper and I get audited, again, I'm subject to having to pay back taxes, penalties, and fines on that whole process. So on the next slide, we talk about where this intersects with ERP and tax compliance, right? So without any automation, what's tax compliance like? Well, it's complicated, right? It changes all the time, and you don't have any choice but to do it to be in compliance with the government, right? But a lot of businesses and systems like NAV struggle to do it accurately, right? While it's still helping to maintain and streamline what has to happen. So there are basically these three ways that businesses handle tax compliance, right? So one is you use your system, let's say it's NAV, and you enter in the tax rates into that system that may, traditionally have been very zip code based, and you think that that's sufficient, right? If you are doing that, you have to update those rates manually. Typically, in a given month, we see over 200 to over 400 plus sales tax rate changes in the U.S. every single month. So it is very much a moving target. And that's obviously based on where you're doing business and where you need to go. So trying to keep up with that, if you do business in a handful of states, you still have to keep on top of that and when things are changing, right? Some people have taken the stance of saying, I'm just going to pick an average rate and apply it across every transaction. That can work, but your delta can be pretty large, right? And so you could be exposing yourself and paying out unnecessary fees in sales tax returns. We actually have another client of ours that was doing business on the internet for a handful of their products, and they would not charge the customer tax, but they were filing tax. So literally, they were writing checks to the government every single month, every single year for money they didn't even collect. So it was a direct hit to their gross margin and the profitability on those particular products. So we've seen people do all different kinds of things to try to simplify and make tax compliance a less effective way to do it, right? So the great part is that NAV comes pre-built with an integration to Avatax, which is our product that makes automation a much easier road. So let's take a look at these next two slides that really talk about what's the estimated amount of time that's involved in this, right? So this slide shows that from an Aberdeen study that average is around 300 hours worth of cost of time spent just dealing with sales tax, right? So this was based on a research study. And you can see what it's based in, right? All of the categories, how many hours were spent on each task, everything from the actual return preparation and filing, which you can see consumed the biggest block of over 60 hours for both small and mid-sized companies, managing tax requirements, researching Nexus, the administration of the taxability changes, a whole bunch of things that go into the cost of compliance. So that comes out to be about 40 hours a month, right? So even it's not necessarily a full-time resource, but it's a lot of time. So that's going into this. The next slide actually translates that into dollars. So you'll see that it shows that the actual cost in hours and materials is over $60,000 for small and mid-sized companies. And you can see we're just translating that labor figure into a dollar figure. So it's not insignificant. And if you're handling it manually today, just know that if you actually had your staff track their time on this is just based on research that says what the average is. But the challenge is that actually means, there's a lot more if that's the average number. So go ahead and go to the next slide, Clay. So on this slide, you'll see here's all the things, the day in the life of a compliance manager. And you'll see a whole bunch of things come up on this screen of what somebody that's responsible for sales tax has to deal with. And you notice how quickly it's hard to read them even. So what's the point of all this? Well, it's that it can be overwhelming, right? It's a lot of information. It's a lot of moving parts. And again, none of it is core to your business. So what can Avalara do to help? So if you want to say goodbye to this manual sales tax management and truly know that you're compliant without all of the expense and labor involved in that, then Avalara can help. So let's talk a little bit about how does Avalara work. So if you take a look at this slide, here you'll see a circle that shows Avatax, right? And that's our cloud-based tax calculation engine. And then there's a plug going down to your software, let's say Microsoft now, right? So here's how this would work. So first, instead of having to research all these rates, building tax tables, implementing new tax process, you install this software connector that links Microsoft Dynamics to Avatax, right? And then because our software is cloud software, you actually don't ever have to maintain rates or taxability rules or boundaries or anything else like that in your system. We take care of all that in the cloud. So when you enter an invoice into Dynamics and you take an order online, your system communicates directly with our web service and sends a little encrypted XML file that has all the data that we need. We actually calculate the tax, so you can see the gears there running. We calculate that tax and we return it back. So we run through the gears, we come up with our percentage of tax, and we pass it back into Dynamics Now. That all happens within 0.4 of a second or less. So it's a very real-time, very fast tax calculation. Then, at the end of the month, you don't have to run a bunch of reports or fill out forms or cut checks. When you process all your invoices, you can log in to your admin console and do a quick reconciliation, and then Avalara will file and remit all your taxes automatically, right? So you see the hand there with the little dollar sign. So you actually pay Avalara one amount, and we distribute the money to all of the jurisdictions when we actually assume liability and responsibility for that. And so then all of that information gets reported back into our administrative console so that you can actually see and review all of your transactions and be able to see all of that information. So all of that's connected in to the Avatax service. So that gives you this end-to-end compliance. So if you go ahead to the next slide, Clay, you can see that our Avalara compliance cloud platform has three main components to it. The first is what we talked about, which is really our tax calculation, right? So we keep up on all the rules and rates, so you don't have to do that. And we do tax calculation based on where it's coming from, where it's going to, and a few other criteria. And we've already integrated that with your system. The second piece of it is our Avalara certificate management piece, which manages all of those exemption certificates so that if you ever get audited, you're never in a situation where you'll get caught without being in compliance, right? You'll have all of those certificates in one place. They'll all be continually updated. There's workflow around it, everything like that. Then lastly is filing and returns. So we actually do the filing and the returns that we talked about. That's our Avalara returns product. And then we have some other products that help with compliance. So we can do 1099. We have, if you're involved in the food industry or convenience retail industry, we have a tool called Matrix Master that actually stores product taxability and rates based on the UPC code of hundreds of thousands of products. And then we also do offer professional services as well for additional tax-related kinds of things. On the next screen, you see sort of the end-to-end sales tax compliance with some of the features of Avalara AvaTax, cert capture, and returns that go a little bit deeper in terms of the capabilities of each of our solutions. Call your attention to a couple of things real quick, but you'll see under the middle column there where Avalara cert capture is listed that we have a collection wizard, right? So what we'll do is so this can actually integrate into your customer master record. So as you add a new customer, we can actually, and if you mark them as being exempt, we can go out and automatically request their exemption certificate and monitor the collection process of that and store that exemption certificate to help and integrate that back into AvaTax as decisions are made and those transactions come up. So going on to the next page, you can see that there's a little bit more detail on the tax rate calculation, so Avalara AvaTax, that we include all of that address validation, product taxability, reporting, and other features such as consumer use tax, and we do support global tax calculations. We have tax information in over 160 countries, so we can support international business if you do that as well. The next just goes into a little bit about Avalara cert capture and some of the exemption certificate management things that we just talked about. And then thirdly, on returns, that we do actually give you the ability to look at a return and review it before you actually get submitted. We actually will submit returns electronically to those states that allow that. There are some states where we actually have to print a paper return and have to be mailed in, but we help manage all of that process for you. So go ahead and do the next one, Clay. So there aren't very many companies today that process their own payroll, right? Outsourcing payroll is kind of a de facto standard. Everybody uses ADP, Paychecks, and hundreds of other options that are out there to process payroll checks. Why? Because it helps them with compliance, because payroll compliance is a messy area. It's very important because it's dealing with people's incomes, right? So companies today that outsource sales tax benefit in the same way, right? You cut costs, you outsource something that isn't a core competence and doesn't necessarily contribute to the growth of your business, and allows you to focus on what you do best in the selling and servicing of the products and services that you provide to your customers. So what's our commitment to you? As this says, right, we strive every day to provide the fastest, easiest, most accurate, and most affordable way to calculate, collect, report, and remit your sales and use taxes. That's our goal. That's why we exist, and that's what we're here to do. So with that, let's open it up for questions. Any questions out there from our audience?
Great, thanks, Mike. As a reminder, if you do have any questions, you can use the raise hand feature. Otherwise, you can type your question into the questions pane right within GoToWebinar.
So a couple of questions that I often get asked relative to, why would I want to outsource this? It's something that I've been able to handle within my own accounting area, my finance team. Maybe I've even outsourced it to my accountant. Why do I need to do this? Because the reality is I'm sure there's only a handful of you out there that have ever gone through a sales tax audit. So if you've never been through an audit, or you've never had to go through the pain of paying past due taxes and fines, it might seem like, this isn't really, am I really a candidate? So the one thing to keep in mind is that sales tax revenue is typically, if you look across all 50 states, it typically makes up 50% of how a state earns income to fund all of their programs. And many states are aggressively hiring more auditors to go after and reclaim money that they feel is not being filed correctly. So there is a risk of audit. But more importantly, when you automate your sales tax, you again take work off the table that isn't core to growing your business. So I think that's one of the things that I think is the most advantageous to this. So any questions, Clay?
I'm not seeing any in the queue.
Okay. Well, we'll leave it open for just a few more moments to get any further questions. Avalara has had a long-standing integration, and actually our relationship with Microsoft is what we started with over 10 years ago. So we've had a lot of experience in working with Microsoft Dynamics in all of its different flavors, but especially now, and have tons of customers that have had a really great experience in using Avalara connected to their solution. Well, last chance for questions. If we're good, Clay, anything come through?
Nothing. No, thank you so much, everyone, for your time today.
Great. Thank you, everyone. It was a pleasure to speak with you today, and we'd be happy to take you on a further, more detailed tour of Avalara if you'd like to, or if you have any questions about how to be compliant with state and local tax regulations, please let us know. Thanks for your time today.